Good afternoon, and welcome to the Dean's Forum on Third Space Thinking. I'm Laura Jackson. I'm an adjunct faculty member here at USC Annenberg and primary researcher for the Third Space Project. And today, this is the culmination of our spring series on third space thinking, and today we have with us Casey Cole. Casey is a longtime science writer for the LA Times and a professor of journalism here at USC Annenberg. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, New York Times, Smithsonian, Columbia Journalism Review, Newsweek, Esquire, Ms., The Washington Post, and many other publications. She was once described by Amazon as the Leonardo da Vinci of science writing and is the author of 8 nonfiction books. Most recently, Something Incredibly Wonderful Happens, Frank Oppenheimer and his astonishing Exploratorium. Her radio commentaries can be heard on American Public Media's Marketplace, and she's been a science commentator for KPCC, NPR's Science Friday, and the BBC World Service. Among her most treasured awards are the American Institute of Physics Prize for Science Writing, the Los Angeles Times Award for Explanatory Journalism, and the Edward R. Murrow Award for thoughtful coverage of scientific controversies from the Skeptics Society. Casey is here today to talk to us about the third space competency of 360-degree thinking, and I'm really looking forward to it and ask you to please join me in welcoming Casey Cole.
Thank you. I'm going to stand. Yeah, sure, that would be great. You could sit over there. Everybody can hear me? Okay. I'm going to stand because, I don't know, I think people have more energy when they stand and you can see me. And I had really decided I was not going to do a PowerPoint. The reason for the yellow balloon was I wanted to bring yellow balloons, but it didn't quite work out the way I thought. In fact, the balloon guy, who I went to yesterday, was very suspicious, and he said there was something called balloon abuse, and he wanted to make sure I wasn't going to abuse balloons. But I will explain why. I've been thinking about the ideas in this talk for a long time. I mean, it's kind of what I teach and what I do anyway. But as those of you who are my students know or have been, there is a so you're not going to do that thingy. Would you mind? Because I'm going to be talking about distracted stuff. Okay, I can do that because she's my favorite, one of them. What I didn't have was a narrative line, and it's so easy, at least for me, to get information. I have a million zillion ideas, but to structure them in a way that means anything, that's really, really hard. So on Sunday, I happened to be at Cal State LA, and there was this yellow balloon that was just floating around campus, and I decided it would be fun to play with it and bounce it back and forth. So my husband and I just started playing with this balloon and got some very funny looks from people. But what I realized what I was doing, and doing things like playing with balloons really frees your mind to think about things, even though it doesn't seem like you're thinking about them. And what I realized was that the yellow balloon for me was a kind of perfect symbol for what I wanted to talk about. So, as you can probably guess by the yellow balloon theme, this is not a practicum, it's an impracticum, because I think that's important. And the main thing I want to leave you with, and the main goal I'm hoping to have, is to help you see beyond under the lamppost, where the man looks, because that's the only place he can see to find his lost keys, and to go out and stumble about a bit, which seems to be what I do all the time. So, innovation mostly, I know most of these talks are about innovation and getting new ideas. It's almost never done for practical purposes. It's almost always done because somebody says, boy, you know, somebody should do that. That would be great if we could have that, or I could. It's something I really am passionate about. And it's very, very little to do with being practicum. So I sort of bastardized this quote a little bit. Innovation is a lot like sex. It's got a practical purpose, but that's not why people do it normally. From my mentor, It's actually, understanding is a lot like sex, but it's the same idea. It's not why people innovate. And I pulled up just 3 of my favorite quotes from scientists saying this in a different way. Richard Feynman, the great physicist, who said that, just a new idea is so hard to think about. Scientists think about this a lot. Henry Poincaré, who was a mathematician, talking about how logic could never lead us to anything but tautologies, in other words, going around in circles. It could create nothing new by just pure logic. And one of my favorites, Cyril Stanley Smith, was a metallurgist who won a Nobel Prize for his discoveries about metals and stuff. And what he discovered was that most of the people who made the major discoveries were actually artists and people who made jewelry. So he came to see it wasn't a coincidence that discovery arrives from aesthetically motivated curiosity, and it's rarely the result of trying to do anything practical. So I realized that usually when I did my best work and did most successful work, I was doing what I probably wasn't supposed to be doing. On this particular day, when I was playing with the yellow balloon, I had just had my first big sort of Twitter success, thanks to my wonderful students who took the time to teach me how to do it. But instead of following up on that, I didn't, and I was trying to figure out why that is. And one of the main reasons, for me anyway, is fear of FOMO. Now, I know that sounds like a tautology, right? Because it's fear of missing out. So you shouldn't say fear twice, but I am afraid of what that fear of missing out and not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm afraid of what it does to me, actually, and what it does to the work I do. So this article, which is the one that I had been working on, I probably worked on for 6 months. I don't even know why. It didn't even pay that much. It was a disaster for Wired magazine, wound up on Quanta. It has to do with the fact that the structure of space may actually be constructed from these entanglements of particles on vastly apart from the universe, just very distant from each other. And I just thought it was a beautiful idea, but it also turns out to be one that's very popular among physicists. And I have to say, the nicest thing that happened on this article was I got compliments from 2 of the people I respect most on the journalism faculty. One is Richard Reeves, who you probably all know about, just wrote a wonderful book. Another one is Nancy Ruiz, our secretary, who just does great work. So I figured if Nancy and Richard liked it, it had to be okay. But it was a big Twitter success. So I put it on Twitter, and suddenly I got all these followers, and a couple of them are really, really hotshot physicists. So I should have continued this. I should have been spending a lot of time, as one of my other students said, feeding the beast. If you're going to be on Twitter, you have to keep doing it. You just can't do it every now and then. It just doesn't work. So I was feeling extraordinarily guilty about this, and it was really just bugging me. Why aren't I doing this? At which point I realized that, well, first of all, let me make the point that I'm not at all obviously I'm not an anti-tech person. Obviously I'm not a technophobe. And I am extraordinarily impressed by what people, especially at Annenberg, have been doing with new media. It's pretty extraordinary. And just even, I shouldn't say even one of my students, I'm so proud of my students, but learning how to create websites and apps from scratch. So I have to show you. This is a little bent, but this is Susan Vallett's incredible interactive app on national parks, and you can push any of these things. These are just 2 of the slides, and she's here, and she will be glad to show it to you afterward if you like. So I love that. But it just felt to me like most of my life I've been doing what I'm not supposed to do, mainly because a lot of them is things I'm just not good at. There were things like being cheerleaders or joining sororities or things like that I just wasn't good at it. It's very frustrating to do things that you're not good at, or that they just didn't appeal for whatever reason it was. So to some extent, I became a 360-degree thinker because I really had no choice. And a lot of times it was because doors slammed. You're working at a place and your editor leaves, and the next editor thinks you're an idiot, or a magazine you're working for goes bankrupt, or a job changes or something. And there were a lot of times when I had to just completely reboot from whatever I was doing and try something entirely different. Actually, radio was one of those. When my LA Times column stopped, I approached KPCC, so they let me do it for a while in Marketplace as well. So when I started out in journalism by accident, I was an expert in Eastern European politics. Yeah, I know. I studied political science, and that's what I knew. And I was working at Radio Free Europe, which I didn't realize was a CIA agency, but it was. Turned out to be the first of 3 times I wound up working for the CIA. But there I was in, back in the USSR, back in the days when there was a USSR in Czechoslovakia, and happened to be there when some really exciting things were happening. And I got just lucky. Some journalist there asked me if I thought about writing. I did. I got a front page story in the New York Times Magazine. I was young, I was lucky, and after that 3 years, nothing but complete failure. But it was a great thing to start with, and it made me realize I wanted to be a journalist. It was not easy to try to freelance. I had a whole wall covered with notes from magazines or wherever I was pitching stories that basically said, "Not for us." That's what they used to. And then I got that job, and I used to write that. Felt really bad about it, too. And then, actually, I went to Newsday. I worked on the night desk, which was really fun in those days, because believe it or not, we got to smoke cigarettes, drink beer, and stay up all night and, just really have a good time. But that job also faded, and this is probably my most awful confession, is I decided to have a child because I was so bored. I know, I really wanted to leave my job, and in those days, if you got pregnant, that was it. So you tried to hide as long. There was no pay, you were just gone. So I got kind of bored with staying home with the baby, though, for a while, too. So I started writing. I started writing for People magazine, among other places, and all the women's magazines. And People came about because I would get these little flyers in the mail saying, "Your baby could be a model, you could make it there." So I started taking my little infant to Pampers commercials and things like that. And the same things started to happen. People would just turn their noses up, well, he doesn't know how to sit up and drink a bottle at the same time or whatever. The ego of the parents it just plummeted. You so cared whether people liked your baby or the ears are too big or something. It was just, anyway, I wrote a lot about that, and I started writing for all of the women's magazines. And then I became an education writer just because that was a really big field at the time. One of the things that happened with Eastern Europe was, and it could happen to any specialty, it was really in the news. Everybody cared, and then suddenly nobody cared. So the expertise I had was pretty useless. So one of the other great accidents that happened to me was while writing a story, I was sent to this place, which is, this is actually the old version of it, the way it looked sort of when I got there. It's the Exploratorium in San Francisco. It's a museum of human awareness, community museum dedicated to human awareness. It's art and science on equal levels. It's still to this day the most creative and interesting place I know, although it's got a much, much bigger, it's got a much bigger space on Pier 15 in San Francisco. And I had never met people like this. There are actually still 30 people from those days working there. So we're talking about staff people for 30 or more years. So that has to be a really great place to work. And it still is. But it led me, of all odd things, to physics, which I really hated in school. I really didn't like science. I didn't see the point. I didn't see what was pretty about it. I didn't see what was interesting about it. One of the things I learned really quickly is that things I learned in physics were absolutely applicable to problems I was having in understanding political science, peace, which is what I wanted to write about, why people couldn't get along, about the baby model thing, you know, why did I have such conflicting views? Why was I always feeling I couldn't make sense of things? Physics has a really good way of seeing patterns in noise. People think physics is hard, but actually it's so simple. It's about like 4 ideas. Biology, that's hard. Life sciences, that's hard. Environment, that's really, really hard. Those are really complicated ideas with lots of long words that are hard to spell. Physics has none of those. So, but that also wound up by accident leading to, you know, amazing opportunities, writing for Esquire. Actually, that's just, I got to go to Stockholm for the Nobel Prizes with the physicist I wrote about for Esquire. So that was an incredible life experience too, just because he was a really nice guy. But I never left behind my interest in other things, in politics and parenting, in feminism. I wrote a lot about women's issues. I mean, to me, all of these things really connected. And science gave me a way to understand a way they did better than almost anything else. Actually, that Quanta article I showed you, which I'll go back to with the kind of wormholes and connections, that actually, it was a recent finding that came from 2 papers Einstein wrote in 1935 about things that had absolutely nothing to do with each other. And only recently did people actually make the connection. So that happens all the time. And I love that because I love seeing those connections between things that don't seem connected. And one thing I do love to talk to my students about is, you know, right and wrong in science is a funny concept. In social sciences and politics, so-and-so was right, so-and-so was wrong, this was proved, they flip-flopped. To me, I mean, flip-flop means you're thinking, right? If you change your mind, it means you're a thoughtful person. If you don't, that's a different thing, if you're willing to look at evidence. And Einstein had this wonderful metaphor of what it meant to discover new things. And it was, you don't tear down your old house and build a new one. You climb a mountain and you get higher and higher, and then you look down and you can still see your old house, but you see all this stuff around it. So it really is thinking on all levels. And it allows you to sort of put together all these contradictory aspects of yourself or your life or other people, things that don't seem to go together. It's a way to really make sense out of that. Actually, one of my new Twitter followers, a guy named John Preskill at Caltech, who's always doing things with Stephen Hawking. He's one of the most esteemed physicists anywhere, and he has a Twitter account. So, but one of the things he wrote on Twitter recently was, I like being a scientist because I like being confused. And I do too, I guess, or at least it gave me an excuse to feel okay with being confused. Most good scientists, but I think most good journalists, most good people in any field allow themselves to be confused a lot of the time, because if you really want to figure something out, when you first start gathering information, there's going to be a lot of things that don't really make sense, and that's okay. So actually, that's my mentor, Frank Oppenheimer, who built the Exploratorium way back when. I love this picture because recently I took a group of students from Annenberg to the Exploratorium, and they did almost exactly the same thing, right? Rika and her husband. So that was cool. So I was trying to figure out why it was so hard to write about science for mainstream publications. And I wrote this for the Columbia Journalism Review, and it was about why editors have to dare to be stupid, as well as the writers. And a funny thing happens, because a lot of the major gatekeepers at major outlets, whether it's television or radio or anything, are really, really smart people, and they have all kinds of prizes in their fields, and they know a lot about a lot of things, mostly politics, sports, business, a lot of things. And they're used to knowing it. And in science, you're usually writing about things that nobody understands yet. And they keep saying, well, I don't understand it. You say, yeah, nobody understands it. That's what makes it interesting. That's why it's science, because nobody understands it. So when you think about it, you know, that story, and it was first told to me by a physicist about the man who looked for his keys under the lamppost because that's the only place he could see. why would you do that? Well, you do that because if you go outside the light from under the lamppost, you're probably going to fall down or run into something. And, you're probably going to get hurt. And you're probably going to make a fool of yourself. So it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable to move out of the light. It's scary. So one of the really, I thought, shocking things about the Exploratorium was that, boy, it's built on, I don't know, it's probably got 500 employees now and a $500 million a year budget, and it's in almost every country in the world, part of their curriculum. But to this day, there are really almost no rules. And it's a place where you're supposed to play. And whereas if something breaks, it's considered their fault, not yours, which is pretty amazing. So when Frank Oppenheimer started it, he was very curious in whether people ever got too old to learn something. And what he found out was that one thing people can get too old to learn to do is to play. Back to my yellow balloon. It's really hard to play. It's really hard because it means you're wasting time, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, there's all that stuff out there. You look stupid. I'm not talking about playing a sport or playing something where there's an actual, I'm just talking about being stupid, just being stupid. But the great scientists are those who remain childlike. So here's my one little demo I'm going to do, which maybe my students have seen. So I was talking about, Einstein was a man who is known for a couple of things. For one thing, for being really childlike, asking very childlike questions that were probably considered stupid questions by other people, but he asked them anyway. He was also an amazing advocate for civil rights and fairness, and he actually, and the race issue in the United States bothered him enormously. And he actually said at one point that he thought peace was more important than physics, so he was not allowed to work on the atomic bomb project. But some of the crazy things he discovered by asking these silly questions, which may seem completely irrelevant, actually everybody probably has a phone in their pocket, probably has a GPS in it. That GPS would not work if we did not understand how space and time actually, gravity is the curvature of space and time created by massive objects, and also that as things go fast, time moves. If you're on a satellite that is going fast, time will move more slowly relative to a clock on the ground. But if you're in an airplane, if you're away from the Earth's gravitational field, actually things will move faster, because as a physicist recently said to me, I knew this, but I'd never heard it said in exactly this beautiful poetic way, which is things like to live where time moves most slowly. And I thought that was really great. So here's how Einstein discovered this. He was wondering about something. So a piece of paper, something light, something heavy, right? Obviously this one. Now you know because you've learned it. It's kind of something. We learn things at a vacuum fall at the same rate, right? Well, but if you haven't seen it, I don't think you can really understand how amazing this is. It just, I mean, to me, that is kind of mind-boggling. But it also shows why it's not enough to use your brain. That 3 pounds of stuff, that intellectual ideas you have, most of the energy you have, the food you eat, it goes to powering the brain, because it's a big energy sink. And I like to think, of course, which is true, that ultimately the energy all comes from the sun, right? Because it gets into plants, the animals eat the plants, make the bread, et cetera. Anyway, so sunshine. Sorry, very, very hokey. But one of the things that we don't do enough is to recognize that there's no thinking without feeling. This is, good neuroscience now. I've had to move from physics, where not that much interesting was going on, into the biological sciences, where there's an enormous amount of interesting stuff. Feelings are really important. The other day I stumbled into a talk here by accident, because I was on campus the wrong day, for a dinner that actually was the day before, but oh well. Anyway, but the amazing thing was that this MIT scientist who headed their history, I actually think she was the head of the faculty at MIT at some point, but she was a historian of science and technology. And what she was talking about was the fact that when people write about technology, they don't take people's feelings about technology into account, and that those feelings are extremely important. And she used a couple of authors, who were Jules Verne, Robert Louis Stevenson, and one I can't remember, and how they wrote and feared. And I just thought that was I was shocked, but I thought it was an amazing point that we don't think about aesthetics, and yet, you know, we all know what it means to be a good person. We know what ugly behavior is. We talk about beautiful souls. We use aesthetic judgments even in our lives. I don't know how many of you following David Brooks at New York Times. He's been talking about his moral bucket list. Hardly some, I mean, it's not that unlike Obama's rhymes with bucket list, which, because it's, did anybody see that? It was hilarious. Yeah, people asked if he had a bucket list, and he said, I have a rhymes with bucket list, which I thought was rhymes with bucket. Think about it. Anyway, it was pretty funny. Then things you're not going to care about. These are things I am not going to worry about. It's not a practical motivation at all, but you'd be amazed at how many people are driven at some level or another by wanting to make the world a better place. That's not something we talk about a lot, but it's extremely common. We also have emotions. We also have bodies. Did I go not where I thought? Yeah, okay, we'll see. I can be flexible. Yeah, so we are basically stuck with our sense organs, and science is an extension of senses. I think I have a slide in the wrong place, but that's okay, or I forgot to talk about something. So we'll see. All of those are limited to some extent, but they're beginning. So telescopes, microscopes, journalism, all of these, Twitter has been amazing. The coverage of the earthquake in Nepal, I think it was the first day coverage, especially, and the Everest avalanche. The way it was covered on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter was really, I think, amazing. It was amazing advertisement for how well social media works in situations like that. But we also have bodies, and that's a reason. And you know, we don't think about getting up and moving around and the importance of actually being in the physical world. And it's not just that that's a lot of where you get your information, by looking at actual people and how they're looking and how they're standing and what their relation is to you. And it's something I really feel we kind of lose because we're always like this. We don't get that kind of physical intuition about things. You also just get it from, you know, working with the outside world. Why Alan Alda? Because he came to the Viterbi School of Engineering a couple years ago, and he said he wanted to teach scientists improv. And I thought he was crazy. He's an actor, but he used to do Scientific American Frontiers. He loves to do things on science. And he realized, and he's right, and now it's just a huge thing, is what a lot of these scientists really need was training in improv, which made them think about who they were talking to and to pay attention to the people out there, that you're not just a thing here broadcasting. You know, I love TED Talks, they're great, but they really are also a one-way street in a way. I mean, you can comment, but there's nothing tangible there that you can get your hands around. So getting that feedback is really important. Feedback for the physical world too. You know, if you hit something hard, it's going to hit you back. If you punch a pillow, it's not going to hurt, right? So it depends on, and all of your life you're out there, you're getting feedback from people, especially nowadays. You're getting applause and you're getting dumped on and you're getting one or the other, but you're always getting some kind of feedback. So it's really important to understand where it's coming from and whether or not you should pay attention to it and what it means. So, yeah. Now, when we talk about, let's see where, yes, I do go here. about 360-degree thinking. We think about, and I am talking about looking outside and looking around you in different ways, but you also looking inside is something that we don't think about, something else I'm really passionate about. I have had so many students tell me that the best advice they got from me was when you take a walk, don't take those things out of your ears. When you have downtime, when you're waiting in line somewhere, when you're stuck in a traffic jam, embrace it, because it's only that time when you can hear yourself think. And all that stuff that you put in, it needs to kind of slosh around there. And you know, it's something that scientists and artists know really well. You learn a lot of things, and then you kind of have to wait. It's why writers, I think their houses are always really, really clean before a deadline, because they're cleaning and they're doing all this stuff and they're baking and but the thought process is going, and suddenly they'll, I don't know, play with a yellow balloon or something, and we'll all come to them. Oh, that's what the story is about. But it takes a while to percolate, and we don't have, so we don't pay, I don't think, enough attention to what goes inside ourselves and intuition. So why this? I heard an interview at NPR the other day by the guy who invented this symbol and why he hated these emoji of all kinds now. And I didn't understand why. I don't like them either, but I had no good reason for that. It's just a aesthetic feeling. Anyway, what he explained was, and then I understood why, was that it took a certain amount of cleverness to take that limited keyboard with only those symbols and come up with a way, which is really important at the beginning of the internet, to show that you were joking, that you were smiling. So there's something about that that even though it takes longer to do, that somehow appeals to me because it captures that, and that explained to me why. It's really just looking in and out. You know, we hear so much about virtual reality and virtual reality, beyond virtual reality, put on goggles. But actually, I mean, think about it. Everything that you're seeing in this room is actually, you see it on the back of your eye. You see with your brain, right? This little pupil is just letting this little bit of light here, this little bit of light here. It's processed back there, and I am projecting it out to you. It is total projection. I'm just, boy, I didn't know I could make that happen. That's really projection. It's a hard thing to get used to, but it's true. So we're always doing this projecting, which is why we jump to conclusions all the time about the wrong things. We can see this happening, especially now in Baltimore and other places where they've seen situations like it previously. Yeah, we see what we believe. We don't believe what we see. We see what we believe, what we're primed to see. I could show a million examples like this. You've probably seen them. Can everybody read those? It doesn't say Paris in the spring, and it doesn't say once in a lifetime. So if that's what you're reading, you haven't read it correctly. I like to take examples from other times and other places too, because when we're talking about the present day, it can be more difficult. This is a graphic for the Daily News in the 1930s when, believe it or not, Jews dominated basketball. So of course, you know, people have to make sense of patterns. That's what our brains do. So this is how the Daily News makes sense of it. They said they dominate basketball because it's a game that places a premium on scheming mind, flashy trickiness, artful dodging, and general smart aleckness. And I was interested in Richard Reeves' new book about the way we took all the Japanese citizens in this country and put them in camps. That even Roosevelt was talking about how the shape of their heads determined, I don't know, if they were all evil or something. I mean, it's what our brains do. So does a cop who's policing a neighborhood where he's afraid, can he or she see a gun where it's not there? Of course, because we project. And I'm amazed that people are just starting to write about it. Of course you see what's not there. We see what's not there all the time. I love this too. You know, William Safire used to write about language for the New York Times, but this was my favorite example. Little kids saying, "I pledge allegiance to the flag." It makes no sense to a little kid, so they hear it in different ways. And one of my favorites is I led the pigeons to the flag. They also have I pledge allegiance to the flag. I mean, all kinds of things that make sense to a kid, but not to us. So we don't realize the extent to which we do that. Yeah, and context, again, being so important. I also like this because when you look at the moon, a full moon, or any kind of moon, it looks pretty bright, doesn't it? I mean, it looks really white. It's not. It's almost black. It's very, 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 very dark gray. That's close to real color of the moon. Actually, that's lighter than it really is. So it's a matter of context. Why does it look so bright? Because it's against this dark, 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 impossibly dark sky. So in comparison, it looks bright. But actually, it's not. I mean, another kind of when you're in a context, you're like a fish in water, right? You don't know it's there because it's just all around you. So one of them right now is we're spinning around very rapidly. We're spinning around galaxy. We're moving. We don't feel any of that like you do in an airplane because it's just part of what we consider to be what is. It's just inertia that's taking us along. And inertia is something that people don't think about either, which is really important, I think, for any kind of innovation. We talk about startups, but we don't talk about stop downs. You have to stop whatever it is you're doing before you could do something new, and that stopping down takes a lot of energy. You just don't stop. Smoking or breaking your car or anything, it takes energy to stop, and you can't really go in a new direction until you stop and understand that. I actually did read about a startup this morning that shut down, which was kind of nice because we never hear about that. So this is a more poetic way of saying part of what I've been trying to say. We live in this very limited world. Lauren Isley is one of my favorite nature writers, and he talks about how we live in our own spider webs, this two-dimensional thing in a much larger arena, which we can't see. The spider thoughts in a spider universe, sensitive to raindrop and moth flutter. Nothing beyond, nothing allowed for the unexpected, the inserted pencil from the outside world. We have a really hard time seeing anything like that. This was also a weird thing that I got out of learning something about physics. Is, people laugh, physicists, they talk about, reality in 10 or 11 dimensions, what's wrong with them? It just sounds completely crazy. However, I have to say, when I was covering Mars a lot, and these Mars landers would, the first day, they would see these huge boulders. And then the camera the next day would go up on its little stem. And suddenly these large boulders were really small. So adding a dimension like going in a plane really takes you somewhere. I had used this graphic. I realized it really shows the power of extra dimensions. I heard Stephen Hawking give a talk on how the universe could be both open, meaning expanding forever, which would give it this shape, or whether it would eventually just all close back on itself and collapse. That shape. And he said, if you look at it in 5 dimensions rather than usual 4 dimensions of space and time, it can be both. It's a different slice of exactly the same thing. It's not 2 different things. So I find that really useful in almost every part of life, that things that appear to be different, if you look at them from a broader perspective, they could actually turn out to be the same aspects of different things. So one of the things that happened while I was writing this recent article, and I felt so stupid, was about horizons. Well, I felt stupid the whole time, but really very stupid. But so in these theories, all the information about what's going on in the universe is stored on a lower dimensional surface, like a hologram, basically. All the information. This is even old stuff by now. It's really quite accepted. It sounds bizarre, but it is. So I kept asking, where is this surface? Where is this information stored? And they kept saying, well, it's on the horizon. Well, what do you mean it's on the horizon? It's not a thing. I mean, where is the horizon? That was my question. And then I realized what an incredibly stupid question that was. Because a horizon, obviously, is something that's in your head. It's always in front of you, and it's always behind you. So it's something that really you make up, and it's deceptive, but it's real. You can learn a lot from horizons. Whether the story is true or apocryphal, I don't know. But you know, the whole story of Columbus realizing that the world was round because he'd see the boat sort of fall over the edge, fall over the horizon. So anyway, I thought that was really, really interesting. Here's another example of things we don't know how to see. It's very hard to see what's not there. And I really have to go back to Baltimore for a minute because, boy, our news media has just done an incredible job of focusing on few incidents and not focusing on so many other things, on the nots. But it's also very hard for somebody in law enforcement to see a gun that's not there when everything in their mind has taught them to jump to that conclusion, because that's their sort of their training. I show this because this was one of the most remarkable examples in science of this. Was Vera Rubin, an astronomer, who noticed that all these stars twirling around this galaxy should actually be flying off in all directions, because there wasn't enough matter in there. There wasn't enough visible matter to hold all that stuff together. So she proposed this idea of something called dark matter, which is actually invisible. We can't see it. We still can't see it, but it comprises about 95% of the universe. People are still making big searches for it. But to see it, but it's not there. And it always reminds me of things I'm not doing. When I first started writing for the New York Times a lot about science, and I kind of sort of snuck in the back door. I was writing about women's issues, so you know, how was I going to convince them? So I started to put the two together, and I wrote about shadows as being things that aren't there and what you can learn from them. Remember talking to people about things that they didn't do that defined their lives? I remember one woman saying, I didn't get a nose job, and to her that was huge. Or like, I decided not to have a child, or not to go to graduate school, or not Twitter, or whatever it is, at least for now. Those decisions are really as big as the things that you decide to do, obviously, because you can't do everything. Of course, seeing what's not there, you know, you've probably heard the phrase, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because you don't see something, it doesn't mean it's not there. And I heard this recently applied to this guy, I think probably everybody read about. He decided to give everybody in the staff $70,000 salary, and he took the same salary. And I read an article about it by some commentator saying, well, there's no evidence to support that. And I thought, says who? You know, really? How do you know that? And the journalist didn't even follow up in any way. So that was bad journalism. Yeah, that's a good one. This and have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. It's my other favorite critical thinking one. Okay, just a few more things. So we have all these tools for extending our senses, right? We have telescopes and microscopes and phones. And, I mean, all of these things are collecting all this information. It's part of what makes the FOMO problem really bad. There's so much to pay attention to. But think about it. Right here in this room right now, everybody's got a phone, right? The messages are coming to your phone, the texts are coming. We're walking through broadcast and radio signals are going right through the room. We're walking right through them. They're here. The only reason we're not seeing them is that we're not putting on the right detector. If I turn on the radio, if I turn on TV, if I pick up my phone, I'll get my messages. So the information is in here. It depends on how you decide to look at something, what you see. There's so much more information all around you than you're almost ever aware of. Yeah. I mean, for example, you know, you have these tools. Whoever thought that you know, there are 2 billion of these in your bed every night. Sorry to disturb your sleep. Dust mites. I mean, nobody even knew that there were things like that until somebody invented a microscope, right? And first look at these. People thought that Leeuwenhoek, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, they thought he was crazy. He found all these little animalcules, but you know, nobody knew any of this stuff existed. So the big picture, the small picture, looking at things globally, that's again where things like Twitter become really important. You get global views on stuff that we can't see otherwise. I think that I don't remember quite where I'm going. Yeah, so part of the real problem that happens with all this information is we don't separate signal from noise. This is a very old illusion you've probably seen, but what's really deep about it is you cannot see vases and faces at the same time. You have to choose. When you focus on one thing, the other thing literally disappears. So you're talking on your phone and you don't see other things. I mean, we walk over home, we adapt to what's around us. We don't see things anymore because we have to make this signal noise choice, and it's a narrow channel. I just thought this was beautiful. It's an example of the same one, but I just thought it was such a beautiful image. Oh, Singy, you can see it good, I think. All right, so sort of want to end on this point. I'm really worried, and I think everybody should be, about the anti-science movement in the United States and the ways people are not getting involved in science. I think we tend to separate the problem of racial and gender bias from the need to have good scientists. It's not that way. We need everybody. And one of the ways that this really comes home to me is thinking about the fact that the world is very unstable. You know, we're in a cyber war. We're in all kinds of. World War II was won by mathematicians and physicists, basically, but also by the entire country, by everybody working together. It doesn't work when you only have a small subset of people doing things. It doesn't work. You need everybody. And I think one of the problems that we really make is that we don't sell science in the right way. We sell it as a bunch of right answers, not as, you know, intriguing questions to ask, which is really what it is. In fact, the National Science Foundation now requires scientists, when they submit proposals, to say what practical outcome they're going to have. That's insanity. You cannot discover anything if you already know what you're going to discover or how it's going to be practical, because none of the practical stuff that we're using has come out of that kind of thinking. It just doesn't. So this was, I won't read it all to you, Robert Wilson, who built our biggest laboratory, Fermilab, huge particle accelerator. They do all kinds of things in Illinois. It's actually a beautiful piece of art. The whole thing is just art. But when the Senate was trying to get him to say what good was it? What would it do for our military? How would it help our country? And the senator is saying it has no value in that respect. And he says, it has only to do with the respect with which we regard one another, the dignity of men, our love of culture. It has to do with those things. And later, it has nothing to do with it has to do with, are we good painters, good sculptors, great poets? I mean, all the things we venerate and honor in our country are patriotic about. So this new knowledge has all to do with honor and country, but has nothing to do directly with defending our country except to help make it worth defending. That's why most science is done. So I hope you will go out. I hope you will stumble, fall, walk outside the lamppost. This is one of my late artist friends. I love this. Blobs, specks, smudges, cracks, defects, mistakes, accidents, exceptions, and irregularities are the windows to other worlds. It's a good place to look. And from Michael Faraday, one of my favorite quotes, nothing is too wonderful to be true. So, thank you. That's all I have to say.
All righty, so let's give Casey another hand. My mind is always blown when I listen to Casey or when I read anything of hers, and I can't even have linear notes. I have to have non-linear notes to follow. But let's open it up for some questions to see. Does anybody have any questions for Casey? An amazing talk here.
Think about Einstein. You know, really simple questions are the best. No stupid question.
Well, I'll start. I loved what you said about asking stupid questions and the fear, that fear of ambiguity. And it really brings for me back that one of the five, I didn't know that this would be true, but there are the five third space competencies, right? One of which is this flexibility, adaptability, which behind it is comfort with ambiguity, not knowing. And I didn't ever think that the 360 thinking would ever be complementary to that. But I see that. Can you talk about that? How does one become
Adaptable.
and okay with feeling that momentary fear of I don't know to get to the breakthrough?
Yeah, it's hard because the way that our educational system is set up now, we talk about risk-taking, but we don't really allow risk-taking. We say we want you to innovate, we want you to try ideas, don't care about grades, but push comes to shove, that's what people have to learn to do, how to please a professor, how to do well on the test. So the inertia of that makes it really, really difficult then to throw that away and say, well, I'm not going to think about that in this context. There's just so much training that goes into that. So I think the more you get out in the world and do things and fail and come back and fail and come back and fail and come back, and that's why you keep hearing from successful entrepreneurs and executives that how important failure is. But it's a lot easier when you've done it a few times and you come back. So I think just practice is a lot of it, but also forgive yourself. Admit that it's hard. I mean, it really is hard. I don't think we give it that credit about how hard it is to be adaptable. It's not in our nature to be adaptable. It's in our nature to keep going in the same direction and doing the same things that we've always been doing and been told to do. So it's hard. The people who do it are brave.
Do you think resilience gets built over time, to fail and recover, right, as opposed to fail, destroy, right?
Well,
So
no,
not
also, I mean, that's what, mentors I find are for. They're people who allow you to do that and encourage you to do it and then pick you up. But the other thing about that adaptability, and I love the relation to how evolution works. So things are adapted to particular niches, right? Environment. The environment changes. You're no longer adapted to that environment. If you find yourself in an environment that is not good for you, where you are not thriving, move. I mean, I can't tell you how many times in my life I've either quit or walked out of something just because I realize I don't like what this is doing to me, or I'm never going to do that. And it's really, really, really frightening. I mean, it's a terrifying thing to do. But if you're not growing, if it's not letting you be the best you can be, there's probably another place where you can. Almost certainly there's another place where you can, but you have to leave the first place. So, yeah.
Questions from the group?
Oh, come on. You know what I think, but I don't know what you think.
Here's one, yes.
Uh-huh.
Wait for the mic, please. Thanks.
Hey, my name is Christoph. I'm from the Global Communications Program. I identified with almost everything you said very much, especially liking to be confused. Because I think especially communication students like us have that a lot. And we have problems to sell ourselves and our capabilities and skills. And also the creativity and innovation. And you probably have heard of Ken Robinson, who also talks a lot about the educational system and its flaws and how it's designed to kill creativity and 360-degree thinking rather than foster it. So and then I would also be interested in how do you teach that? How do you change the educational system, and what can we do as people who now will go out in the world and hopefully do good things to create that culture? Because I think it's also a cultural thing.
Boy, I wish I knew. I learned a lot of that from my students, of course. I love Ken Robinson's image of, like we treat our, especially in universities, like our bodies are sticks to carry our heads around on so we can go from meeting to meeting. It's pretty funny. I think you do it, most good things happen on a one-to-one basis. I think one thing we don't do enough is get out there, and it can be on social media as you find groups that are supportive, that are like you, and you also then enable other people to do that as well. So it can kind of become a meme that you do that. You may not be able to do it in every situation, though, but I think I've seen it so often in so many people I know where they're just, not finding the right place or not fitting in or not knowing what to do. I mean, my daughter did this, was just flailing for years and years and suddenly found, graduate school in Seattle. The last place I ever thought she would wind up. I don't mean Seattle, I mean grad school. Like, whoa. But, it's like she found her people, sort of the way I did at the Exploratorium. I mean, who would have? But you don't know if you don't get out there. One thing I didn't mention, one of the oddest 360 things that happened to me was getting to know some people who were accountants. I thought accounting had to be probably the most boring thing in the world. It turned out, so the guy who actually got me into it was his former CFO of Microsoft and chair of the NASDAQ stock exchange. So I'm going to listen to him when he says this. And one of the things he was pointing out that a big problem with our economy and the stock exchange in particular, he was a big rebel in that, if you can imagine someone like that being a rebel. Because most of what our economy is based on now, we don't know how to value. So it's not like, I give you money to make the Coke, which came in the can, or you do something for me and I pay you. Most of it is these obscure financial instruments, or real estate that is valued, or startups, or things that are almost impossible to put a dollar value on it. They seem really, really arbitrary, and that is a serious problem. So suddenly, I found myself talking at an American Association of Accountants, and I found they're really interesting people because they think about value, about how we value things. So it's kind of, I'm not saying it's easy, it's really difficult to let yourself stumble and to encourage other people to do it. So, I mean, you'd almost have to ask some of my students what I do or whether it works. I really have I hope so. I know that's what let me do it as mentors, partly.
Okay, another question? Yes, wait for the mic, if you would, because we're recording all of this right up here.
Hello everyone, my name's Sally, and it's like I made a great decision to come here to listen to Casey's speech because today's my last day of undergrad. And I took Casey's class last semester. It was ASCJ 420. That is the name of the course is called Exploratorium. And what we did is explore. So we took the trip to San Francisco, the Exploratorium, and stayed there for 3 days. It was great experience. As what you mentioned before, you said, how did Casey apply 360 degrees thinking into her teaching and into her as a mentor to us? Is except for the curriculum, the course curriculum that you have to follow, like the reading and writings, she just let us explore and play around with it like kid. So by the end of the semester, we did project using all the social media or the new media technology platform. We made videos, we made the presentation about the t-shirt design, something very interesting. And I just do the old-fashioned, the handcraft. It's all about creativity and play and related to the course Exploratorium and Explore.
So we're offering in the fall, if you know anybody, it's a 420 class. It's going to be a full semester this time. We're going to go to all kinds of labs, museums. The Fisher Gallery has a great exhibit coming up called The Plastic Ocean, or Ocean of Plastic. Yeah. So using art and science and just getting out there, we'll do improv, and we're going to use fiction as well as nonfiction, and it's called Ways of Knowing is what I'm calling it. And I really need more people to sign up. So do definitely push this course. But yeah, and I showed the students' projects to the people at the Exploratorium a couple of months ago, and they were so great. They were saying, they got it, they got it, they got it. And they really did get it. They did amazing things. So yeah, that was pretty great. Does anybody have a hard question? Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask but are embarrassed to?
I'm not embarrassed, but I do have a question.
Okay.
So my name is Omaira Zadran. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Biological Sciences, and I took Professor Cole's course in journalism, specializing in reporting science and technology, and I really enjoyed it because I love not only her, but I loved, you know, her style of teaching because she's definitely an amazing mentor, and she definitely, me as a researcher, allowed me to think differently that I normally am not trained to think like. Take like very complex scientific concepts and kind of relaying them in language that, you know, everybody could understand. And in a way, not only are other people that I'm explaining to understand what I'm doing, what my thesis research is, but I'm actually learning a lot more about my research in a way as well too. And that's one of the major things, or one of the many things I've learned by taking Casey's course. And my question is for her, is that now since we have like this surge of like this generation of tech-savvy individuals, everything nowadays that we read about or we find out about is usually on social media, whether it's Instagram or Twitter. I know you discussed that, you know, the event, the earthquake that happened unfortunately in Nepal was, you know, really well, you know, showcased on Twitter and Instagram, and people were getting to know what was going on there. And now it's come to this position where newspapers and magazines are becoming obsolete. There's you know, a decline in sales in magazines and such. I don't know if this is true or not, but this is just what I've heard. Just based on your professional opinion, your expertise, do you think that social media actually is detrimental to the whole like journalism field, or do you think that social media may provide something that magazines or other media don't really necessarily have?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very valuable, and for the time being, because the business model has been completely ruined. So people are kind of having to reinvent it. But some magazines are coming back, doing better. There are actually many examples of things going from electronic to print. The Los Angeles Review of Books, Nautilus, which is a nice art science online magazine, now because of demand is in print. There was a guy who was writing a blog for Wired. I forget what it was called, but it was so much in demand he actually printed himself the paper copies because people wanted it. So to some extent, there's always going to be, I think, some of both going on. And yeah, I mean, it's a big readjustment. I don't think it's ever going to go away. And people who still want book sales are not doing all that badly, actually, in some quarters.
Just adding on to that, I personally feel that just because there may be fewer newspapers in print, it doesn't necessarily, replace. The internet does not replace the medium. It's sort of like television didn't replace books. Anyways.
Yeah, one of the really bad things that's happening, of course, is that everybody is feeding out of the same trough. So newspaper reporters go out and do legwork, and then radio and multimedia and all that feeds off that. So it's a problem of how we're going to pay those people to be out there still doing those jobs, whatever form they're doing it in. That's and I've really become in tune to this. Boy, listen to something on NPR and say, oh yeah, I read that in the New York Times, yesterday or this morning. Like, where's your actual reporting? But there are people out there on the ground, and sometimes they do the new media stuff, but then they will write a book. I mean, every night on Jon Stewart is somebody with a book, I mean, every day on NPR you get 2 or 3 people with new books, so they're still being published. Yeah, I don't think it will go away.
Okay, any last questions? Okay, I have one more then, because I'm dying to ask it. Casey, what do you do when you get stuck, when you don't see the pattern?
Like right now? Yeah. Well, yeah, it's really hard. I mean, Frank Oppenheimer, my mentor, used to say that the role of a teacher was to help you get unstuck. If you don't have people around to help you get unstuck. I basically tell myself I've been here before, and try to go on that. And there's actually a mathematical concept I find, economics concept I find useful, called regression to mean. Is that things, when they're really, really bad, they tend to get better. In fact, I mean, not always, depends on what the cause is, but there's this great story in Dan Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he talks about this, I think it's a pilot trainer, and he says, every time my pilots do really well, I praise them, and then they do worse. But if they do really badly, and I yell at them, then they do better. Well, that's just probability. That's just probability. So you can assign a cause and effect to that. So, you know, and I try to remember when everything is going great and that, you know, that's going to change too. Yeah, it's very hard to listen to your own advice. I always tell my students, you know, every time a door shuts, that's an opportunity, but it sure doesn't feel like that when it happens. It does not feel that way. So, you know, just to kind of remember that, and I know what's actually going to happen. In the same way that I know that the plane that I'm on is going to land safely. My feeling is that, oh no, you know, something that weighs 500,000 pounds should not be floating in the air, because it makes no sense. But I know that it will. So it's a difference. You know that it will work. Look at examples, look at people. And for heaven's sakes, you know, I have a life committee, which I think everybody should have, just dear friends. Get help. I mean, talk to your friends, talk to people, talk to mentors. Don't try to do everything yourself. Yeah, so that's another thing I do. I rely a lot on people giving back feedback that's helpful, you know.
You were going to tell us about the balloon?
The balloon. Yeah, why I couldn't get the balloons here today? Because the balloons we were playing with were kind of, I wanted to be able to bounce, to get people to actually have the physical sense. But this balloon guy did not get it, so they're still on the ceiling. 3 or 4 days from now, they'll be down enough to actually bounce. But I thought just walking in with balloons on the ceiling was not going to accomplish. Well, I wanted to insert a sense of play and actually doing something, but it's harder to get a balloon of exactly the right. But if you see a balloon, go for it. Nothing more fun. And thank you all for being a really great audience.
All right, thank you all. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.